Left is Larry Harlan, who developed the TMDL for the next item, item number 6.
Oh, you came up together.
Correct.
Okay.
And then to Larry's left is Jessica Jar, who is our regional board attorney, counsel.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. Thank you, Mr. Rose. My name is Peter Osmolowski, the lead staff on this TMDL for this agenda item. I have a very brief presentation, sort of a 30,000-foot overview of the TMDL project. And I also have some supplemental slides if we want to discuss it in more technical detail. But I'll just begin with a very broad 30,000-foot overview. Our recommendation is to adopt the proposed resolution. The proposed additions to the Central Coast Basin Plan include total maximum daily loads, TMDLs, and an implementation plan for nitrogen compounds and orthophosphate in the lower Salinas Valley. A broad highlights or broad overview of this TMDL. This TMDL establishes total maximum daily loads for nitrogen compounds and orthophosphate and an implementation strategy to address nutrient pollution of streams in the lower Salinas Valley, which has been a very long-standing and serious problem in this part of the state. We are proposing to use existing regulatory measures to implement TMDL goals, specifically the Central Coast Agricultural Order and MS4 stormwater permits. The TMDLs are consistent with the Central Coast Water Board's identified highest priorities, which include the protection of human health, drinking water quality, and the protection and restoration of aquatic habitat. This TMDL project has been independently peer-reviewed by scientists, researchers from Virginia Tech University and Washington State University. This TMDL project has also been reviewed by United States Environmental Protection Agency, US EPA. They have reported to us provisionally that this TMDL does meet all requirements under the Federal Clean Water Act. For this state board meeting, we did receive public comments. I have a list of the people who submitted public comments. I'm not going to read them off, but I'll put them up there for your review. We did respond in written comments to all of these commenters, and those were provided as part of the agenda. We do recommend TMDL adoption, wrapping up here, and as I mentioned earlier, this TMDL does address a serious and long-standing problem of nutrient pollution in the lower Salinas Valley. This TMDL will address the restoration and protection of aquatic habitat designated beneficial uses, drinking water supply designated beneficial uses, risk to public health and public nuisances from algal toxins, groundwater recharge, and irrigation supply for sensitive crops. So it's a very serious water quality problem, and this TMDL endeavors to address the restoration and protection of multiple beneficial uses, and we do recommend adoption. That is the end of our broad overview of the TMDL. We have supplemental slides, or we can just launch into dialogue and questions, whatever your preference is.
All right. I'm going to defer to my colleagues, but that really was a summary. I just think for the people listening who may not have read every item on the agenda, it'd be nice to know what the key actions in this are that they would see on the ground and that folks would have to deal with. But I'll defer to my colleagues for questions. Maybe we'll get to that.
I did want to know more specifics about the irrigation supply. What are you expecting in terms of irrigation supply?
Nitrogen pollution or nitrate pollution of groundwater does, and nitrate in irrigation water is detrimental to sensitive crops, specifically things like avocado, grapes, citrus, some grain crops. The Salinas Valley is mostly, as you might know, vegetable crops, cola crops. So it's not currently a problem with respect to irrigation supply. But some of our rivers are designated for groundwater recharge, and the nitrogen pollution can affect the groundwater quality and affect potential designated beneficial uses for irrigation supply of sensitive crops.
So can you describe a little more, if you have it in slides, it's fine, a little more precisely for people who are watching over the webcast or people in the audience, what it is that you're actually doing? Like what,
Sure.
You don't have to go into every detail that's at the micron level, but what does this do that's different from where you are right now?
Yes, I'm going to go straight to our TMDL implementation slide. Well, first let me begin by saying, in developing this TMDL, we are establishing or proposing numeric water quality targets or thresholds for nutrients, specifically nitrate and orthophosphate, that are in fact pretty low, and they will be challenging to achieve. So that should be acknowledged right up front, that these are low thresholds or low targets to achieve. With that in mind, we are proposing a 30-year timeline to achieve these targets. So we recognize it's not going to happen next week, it's not going to happen next year, it's not going to happen in 2 years. It's going to require quite a bit of time to achieve these aquatic habitat protection targets. And that slide just kind of illustrates, it's just an illustration of how low they are. And I can talk in more detail if there's questions about that, but just to highlight that.
Yeah, on the aquatic habitat protection numbers, there was a significant range there of 1.4 to 8. Is that when you go through the process as recommended in the state board's numeric nutrient endpoints program for inland surface waters and estuaries, does this range of numbers come out of that type of analytic process?
That's correct, Mr. Moore. These targets were developed with the California nutrient numeric endpoints approach. So we did use that methodology to support and develop these numeric targets. So that is correct.
And I guess there are a number of factors that go into generating such a range.
Yes, the reason we have, if you look at the row for nitrate, those are our nitrate water quality thresholds or targets, and there's a range there, as Mr. Moore pointed out. The reason there's a range is that in any given watershed or in any given stream reach, there are many factors that contribute to degradation of aquatic habitat, biostimulation, not simply limited to the nutrient concentration. So we look at things like canopy, the amount of riparian or tree canopy shading, turbidity in the water column, the stream hydraulics, and all of those factors mean that you cannot have just a single uniform nutrient concentration that applies everywhere, because there are many different factors that contribute to biostimulation or degradation of aquatic habitat. So we used established methodologies to develop this range of targets that would be applicable to specific stream reaches within the lower Salinas Valley. Go back to it. Okay.
Oh, right, that was,
Is there any more questions on in terms of the nutrient water quality targets thresholds? Okay, and then Chair Marcus wanted us to sort of just go into a little more detail about how we're going to implement this TMDL. It's important to remember or recall that TMDLs do not self-implement. They're not a regulatory tool like a permit, waste discharge requirement, et cetera. So they don't self-implement. So this TMDL is going to rely on some existing regulatory tools that the Central Coast Water Board already has to achieve the TMDL objectives. We, as you know, we have a Central Coast Agricultural Order that's fairly robust, and it has a number of monitoring requirements. It requires discharges to achieve water quality standards, has monitoring requirements, has reporting requirements, and at this time we are proposing that we rely on those requirements in the agricultural order that we will use and over time to determine that this TMDL is being implemented and progress is being made. So we're not proposing additional regulatory measures to implement the TMDL at this time. In terms of,
I have a question on that.
yes, ma'am.
So other than the ag order, oh, I see, you're going to go through stormwater as well. So those are the two primary regulatory measures that you're relying upon.
Those are the two, correct, those are the two primary ones.
So a question about ag. I see that there are some from the ag here, so I'm going to just anticipate Do you, did you do any modeling to see if, so this is a 30-year target. Did you do any modeling to see if the existing ag order continued in effect without significant changes, that you'd be able to hit that target? Because I'm assuming that maybe there's some in the ag community that are uncomfortable, even though this is not a regulation. I'm assuming that the ag order is going to be updated, and it'll continue to be updated. Could this be used to drive more stringent regulation on the ag order? And I ask that because I know it was a very delicate balance.
Yes, we can't speculate on what future versions of the agricultural order will look like, but I will say that we have heard this concern that, well, if you establish these targets in this TMDL, maybe it'll be put into a future agricultural order as a enforceable water quality limitation. At this time, we're not we've been in contact with our agricultural order staff, and at this time, we are not recommending that our nutrient water quality targets or thresholds be incorporated as enforceable water quality limitations. And one reason for that is, as I mentioned, there are many factors, confounding factors, that contribute to aquatic habitat degradation, biostimulation, independent of nutrient concentrations. So we don't want to lock ourselves into a box of, well, you have to meet this nutrient concentration, and if you do, you're scot-free, you're home free. Because we have a number of water quality parameters that we need to look at to determine if the TMDL is being achieved. So again, I can't speculate on what future versions of the ag order is going to look like, but one concern was about these targets and if they would be recommended to be put in future ag orders as enforceable numeric limitation.
Well, I understand you can't speculate, but have you done modeling? Does it appear that these, I mean, you're relying on these two regulatory measures, I suspect, because you've done some sort of analysis that it should help you to hit the target, right?
Thank you. This is, again, I'm Christopher Rose, the TMDL Program Manager in Region 3. To answer your question directly, whether we did any modeling, the NNE is a spreadsheet model in itself, and what it does is it predicts the nutrient concentrations that are necessary in order to protect aquatic life. So to answer your question, yes, we did use that model. In addition, EPA has a methodology which is more of a mathematical methodology for determining what the targets should be in order to protect aquatic life. What models don't do, or what these models don't do, is predict 30 years out, because there's, as Mr. Osmolowski was saying, there are just so many variables in the environment that a model really can't predict that far out with weather and so forth. And with respect to whether or not, you also had a comment about whether or not this TMDL could basically serve to ramp up requirements for our agricultural order. Frankly, we have a long way to go. Concentrations of nitrate, for example, in this particular watershed, in some cases, are orders of magnitude above the drinking water standard. And we think it's going to take quite a while to get down even to the drinking water standard. So the agricultural program, or the order as currently written, has certainly enough adaptive strategy in it so that as time goes on, we can see progress being made even to achieve the drinking water standard. And once we reach that, then we still believe that there's enough adaptive management strategies in the order to get us from the drinking water standard, which is 10 milligrams per liter nitrate as nitrogen, down to the low concentrations you saw protective of aquatic life. So do I think that it could be used as a strategy to ramp up regulation in agriculture through our order? I don't think so, because we have such a long implementation period, and the current order is really robust enough that we think we can implement for a very long period of time.
Okay, thanks. And then the last question has to do with stakeholder processes moving forward. This is an implementation plan. Will you be reviewing it periodically? And if so, do you intend on having interactions with the stakeholder community?
The short answer is yes. We have committed in our implementation plan to reviewing the progress on this TMDL every few years. We've also identified we've tried to provide a lot of flexibility in how to demonstrate that progress is being made, that results are being achieved. Again, nutrient and pollution and biostimulation is very has very many confounding factors contributing to it. So we're providing a lot of flexibility as much as we can to show that progress is being made. And we have provided, in our implementation plan, we have provided for opportunities for stakeholders to submit studies, submit information, submit data to us to support the evaluation of TMDL progress and TMDL implementation. And we are routinely in contact with some key players in the grower community that we seek information and input from. So again, the short answer is yes.
One thing that has been used in other regions when you have these long, quite complicated processes is to have a annual or every other year some kind of gathering of the science and the stakeholders so that there can be some sharing of information that is coming out of the process. And so I would encourage you to do that. It would be something that local elected officials would probably benefit from, and it would you know, basically people can then keep up with the science as it evolves or the changing circumstances as they evolve, and not kind of wait. You don't have to. They don't have to wait till you contact
Right.
them or they contact you.
I think that is a great idea, and particularly with the item that we heard just before this one about what happens, what is going to be happening with our weather over time and our rate. And so I think that's a great suggestion, and thank you.
If I could add real quickly, I also think it's important to talk to stakeholders because they can, we like to identify success stories. We like to talk about them, and the stakeholders sometimes can give us information that allows us to identify success stories. And I can say for this watershed, the Quail Creek subwatershed, the growers have been proactive and adapted management measures and have made significant improvements. So we definitely want to be able to give credit where we can.
Just another question before we turn to the cards. We have a couple of speaker cards. And I'm just trying to help for the people listening to put this in context. And Dee Dee and I are old airheads, you know, having worked on air quality for a long time and familiar with long-term planning horizons and measures that are yet to be adopted. This is going to be an arena where there's going to be room for a lot of technical breakthroughs and in practices, but also in technology in the course of the next 30 years. How should folks who are not in the sort of the high priesthood of the language we speak and all that think about these 30-year targets? This is just aim high and steering, where we're trying to go, and then you built in flexibility to acknowledge change over time. You said adaptive management a number of times. How do they look at this action?
Okay, so how does the average person look at this, these time frames and this timeline and what it means?
What this action's what it
Yeah.
actually is saying.
Okay, so what this action is saying is, okay, there's a very serious nutrient pollution problem in the Salinas Valley. It involves both surface water and groundwater. We have identified goals that we need to achieve that at this time we predict will be protective of beneficial uses. So we've established goals that we need to strive for, and we've established some flexibility and some implementation methodologies that could be started to be applied to make progress towards that goal. The uncertainties we identify is that, look, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty here. It's going to be an iterative process. We've identified some milestones where we need to come back and revisit this and see if the implementation is correct or our numeric targets are correct. So we definitely envision this as an iterative process. So the bottom line is we're establishing long-term goals we need to strive for. We need to start making progress towards those goals, but we need to periodically and episodically review our targets, our implementation plan, et cetera.
Thank you. That's great. Mr. Rose, anything to add to
I might
that?
also add that as you can imagine, we've had a lot of stakeholder meetings for these two TMDLs that are before you today. And the agricultural community definitely get the fact that after all these meetings we've had, that compliance with these TMDLs is essentially compliance with the agricultural order. And they understand that. And they understand that compliance with the agricultural order is really demonstrating progress as they move forward. And so how do they interpret these long-term milestones? They interpret it as compliance with the ag order, which is showing progress in meeting water quality standards, their objectives.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions before we turn to speaker cards? All right. First, we have Gail Delahant from Western Growers Association. And I know you're on up for both on one card, which is saving paper. I appreciate it. We can do that.
I can do that,
Yeah, you can do that.
although my husband doesn't think I recycle enough.
Well,
He's a
I
Nazi.
look forward to meeting him, and I can give him a gold star or a medal for that one. That's good.
Hi, I'm Gail Dillahant with Western Growers. We have about 3,000 members in California and Arizona who grow the fresh fruits and vegetables and tree nuts. And a lot of my growers are on the Central Coast who grow all the wonderful things that you buy in your produce section of the grocery store. And we do have concerns with this TMDL for basically the implementation of it. And when I read it in a layman's looking, like on the piece of paper, like the other gentleman mentioned to you, on a piece of paper, it looks pretty good, and you can look at pictures and everything, but on the ground, in the real world, agriculture has great concerns that they will not be able to meet all the requirements in this implementation plan and stay in business. As you know, some of you have been out to the Central Coast, you have toured some of the farms, you've seen all of the technical best management practices that we've implemented already, but the monitoring data is showing that we're getting better, but we started off really, really, really bad, as these gentlemen have told you. So in 30 years, maybe we'll get there. We're concerned with the CEQA analysis. It does talk about some of the small broccoli growers down, and I'm going to mix both of these together because Santa Maria and the Salinas have a similar TMDL thing, so I want to save time.
Fine.
But down in the Santa Maria area, and it could be in Salinas also, the small broccoli growers probably will not be able to comply with the objectives and the numeric targets that are going to be implemented, and they'll probably go out of business. Or they'll have to grow lettuce or strawberries. Well, this doesn't take into consideration that growers on the Central Coast have rotation crops, as you probably know. We grow broccoli because it's a good additive to the soil. It takes up more nitrogen.
Broccoli's
than-
just good for everyone and
just
everything, I
Right.
guess.
And so then I can plant a lettuce crop, or I can plant a strawberry crop, and I can grow it organically. But we don't see where this, takes into consideration that effort. Also, I wrote some things down. The other thing is the pump and fertilize. We've been talking about pump and fertilize a lot, especially after Dr. Harder issued his report. Pump and fertilize is a great way to help get rid of the nitrate.
Right.
And that's what growers are doing. They are pulling from the shallow aquifer now, testing that water, seeing what nitrate is available to the crop, because not all of it will be, and they will use that. But we see the words written in this implementation plan. We won't be able to do that. It's a disincentive for growers to pull from the shallow aquifer. We will want to go down to the lower aquifer, which competes with Muni, because it's cleaner. So as we go forward, and this next ag order that we will be negotiating, it will not be a waiver, it will be a waste discharge requirement. And this TMDL, both of them, the Santa Maria one also, we have great concerns that we will just flat not be able to meet it. And it will get stricter and stricter and more complicated for us to achieve any of it. So, I even have 1 minute left. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But yes, we have grave concern. Oh, I had one question.
Sure.
Can you adopt a TMDL without the implementation plan? That's my question.
Would you like us to answer that question directly? Yes.
Well, sure, better you than me.
Very good.
I could answer it, but you might
Very
not
good.
like my
You
answer.
could.
I'm a little
This-
dated on this stuff.
This TMDL has an implementation plan in the, if you look at attachment for the regional board hearing item, if you look at attachment 2 to the staff report, this we call the final project report, and within the final project report there is an implementation plan, and it's been reviewed by US EPA as well as scientific peer reviewers.
She's asking us if you can adopt a TMDL without an implementation.
If you're asking us generically, can we adopt a TMDL without an implementation plan, or are you inferring that this TMDL does not have an implementation
former.
plan?
The form, yeah.
The former, okay. Well, I can tell you that that US EPA can adopt a TMDL without an implementation plan. However, my understanding is that state requirements is that we have to have an implementation plan in our TMDLs.
Okay.
This
So
is
I-
Mr.
I-
Bishop's life, so that's why I just smiled at him.
I have a question to you. Why would you want it without an implementation plan? I actually think that this recognizes the hard work that you all have done on the ag order, and without it, I think it just could raise a question.
Well, I just guess, I know you're going to adopt this TMDL today.
Yeah.
And I was just hoping that we could change a little bit of it, the implementation plan a little bit.
What would you want to have changed?
Well, I would like more clarification on the concerns that I raised today.
In the
on
CEQA
public
document?
fertilizer and yes, and the CEQA document. And so I guess that's what I'm kind of looking for. Maybe I just need to get it on the record. So as I'm sitting down as a stakeholder going forward with the new ag waste discharge requirements that we're going to be working on, you know, I can point to the record and say, look what you said.
So I can clarify a couple things, unless Michael is willing to, you can go first.
What a
You have-
team.
You have two choices. You can adopt or you can remand. You can't change it, so you can't adopt it in a different way. That's just not an option that you have at this point. And I'll let Michael answer the question about can you adopt a TMDL in California without an implementation plan?
Well, I think Board Member Diadama got to sort of the key issue. Without the implementation plan there, when the Central Coast Water Board would go about adopting any of the waste discharge requirements that contain a load allocation, especially for those waste discharge requirements that serve as a Clean Water Act permit, it would be under an obligation to essentially immediately implement the waste load allocations. And that has been the situation that has been hugely problematic around the state where EPA is promulgated without an implementation plan. So at the highest level, it's just good policy to have an implementation plan. As staff for the Central Coast Board underscored, this is a long-term implementation plan that's designed to give the regulated community time to come in compliance. And as the board members who've been on here on the board for a long time have heard me repeatedly say, the nice thing about the TMDLs is as they are going into the water quality control plans, those are living, breathing documents that the boards revisit throughout the duration. And given the long implementation schedules for this, it gives us plenty of time. And then just the final point with respect to whether or not as a matter of law there needs to be an implementation plan. I mean, the Port of Cologne Act expects that the water quality control plans will have programs of implementation, and there must be programs of implementation for the water quality objectives. The waste load allocations in a TMDL are not water quality objectives, but they are a step in implementing them, and the further implementation language just helps provide a further pathway forward so we have the reasonable assurances that those water quality objectives will ultimately be implemented.
And I have a follow-up question. I'm glad you brought up the air quality arena. And if you have a SIP and you don't meet it, there are significant implications. So could you talk a little bit about what happens in the event that the TMDL is not reached in that 30-year timeline?
Can I just add a thing? The good thing about this is we're the ones setting it. It's not set in statute. That's the big difference. But,
Right.
Yeah. So we can
I mean,
change
just
it.
for the benefit of the stakeholders that are here.
Yeah, the most important thing is what that will require is the water board, the Central Coast Water Board or the State Water Board, to revisit and then ultimately potentially to adopt more onerous requirements, whether they are in the basin plan, or the basin plan could be revisited and adjusted if it's determined that in order to address the nutrient issues, a lower number may be appropriate, or based on further development of numeric nutrient endpoints, refinement of the wasteland allocations. But if the numbers stay the same and they're not being implemented, that would mean additional regulatory requirements from the Regional Water Quality Control Board.
Can I try a little differently? As we said earlier, that the TMDLs are not self-implementing, so that means they have to be put into another regulatory tool, at which point, if they were put in as, for an example, as numeric effluent limits for the ag order and those weren't met, then they would be enforceable in that way.
Right.
It takes another step is what we're trying to say.
Thanks.
And they're very, as this nice gentleman had said, they are very low targets.
Right. Yes.
Very low.
We see that. But it's a 30-year horizon. so there's-
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that goes like that.
Great, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Danny Merkley from the California Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Chair Marcus, members of the board. Danny Merkley, California Farm Bureau. I guess I just want to make a couple of real quick points without trying to reiterate what we submitted in writing and reiterating what Gail just said. Appreciate what staff's responses, not only here but also in writing. It's a little different than what we've experienced on the ground over the last several years. So I don't know how else to put that, but to suggest that we have some very good discussions, some very good congenial discussions, debates, however you want to put it. At the end of the day, what we see in writing is what both we and the regional board get pushed by others to deal with. And so we have some very serious concerns about the way this is moving forward, especially when we have so many other processes moving forward. We've spent a great deal of time, everybody has, on other processes to address this issue that's taken 50, 60, 70 years to develop by no nefarious acts, just by following the best available science, the best technology from researchers and from some of the same universities that have done some of these studies as well. The ball just keeps moving, and it makes it very difficult in the agricultural environment, which is a very volatile environment of its own, to know what we have to do to be in compliance. And so we've got some concerns as a result of that. I'm always very hesitant to talk about growers going out of business because of X, Y, or Z coming into play. I've been hearing it for 57 years as a farmer. But what I have seen are just at home, many of my neighbors, people I went to school with, grammar school, high school, and so on, that are no longer farming because it became more and more challenging and they weren't able to keep up. It didn't mean that land went fallow, but it meant my friends and neighbors that are still farming swallowed that up. And what we continue to do, we've seen it in the dairy industry, we're seeing it in other parts of agriculture. The Central Coast particularly has a very good mix of small and large growers. We see it forcing larger family farming operations to become even larger when they swallow up the small guys that don't have the resources to do some of this stuff. And then they get dubbed or labeled corporate agriculture, which is laughable to me. I'll stop right there. One of the board members who will remain nameless said I went on a little long 2 weeks ago, so I don't want to do that again today. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, go ahead, Fran.
Actually, not for Danny, but this is for staff, and it's based on Gail's.
Yeah, any questions people have for Danny?
Gail's question about the pump and fertilize practice,
Yes.
which has been encouraged But if it were to push people toward, pulling fresher water out of deeper aquifers, have you considered that in your team? How are you considering that?
Yes, thank you for that question, and for bringing it up, because I also wanted to bring it up and also be on the record, so to speak, as Ms. Delahunt requested. And so our response is that we encourage the pump and fertilize approach, and we would deem that as progress. We would deem that as progress in our agricultural order, that if they are using the nutrients that are available in the shallow aquifer on their crops, that we would deem that as progress in the agricultural order. And again, progress in the agricultural order is deemed as progress towards achieving this TMDL. And so we want to make that loud and clear. We want them to use the shallow aquifer. And so we encourage that, and we encourage that by saying very forthright that that is demonstration of progress towards implementing the agricultural order, which would then be progress in showing achievement of this TMDL.
That's great. That answers my question. As usual, Ms. Delahunt brings a very down-to-earth, practical set of questions. And another was related to the farmers thinking of rotating crops and being creative and building nutrients in the soil, as she used the broccoli example. And the concern that the TMDL targets would somehow create disincentive for these type of practical approaches, which you just characterized in the other cases, something that would demonstrate progress. Could you comment on these other soil building techniques?
I'm not exactly sure which soil building techniques.
Well,
you are
she
referring
talked
to.
about rotating of crops and nutrient management within the soil, which will, nitrogen and phosphorus will fluctuate.
Yes.
And there's a concern that the TMDL with its hard targets would, create a disincentive to, allow some increase and then decrease, within the fluctuations. Could you comment on that?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that we've done in Region 3 also is we have about $3.25 million that has been allocated from Proposition 84 money in order to implement irrigation and nutrient management practices. And so as part of that, and let me also say that about $1 million of that money is targeted to the Santa Maria watershed. And so we are really trying to help, frankly, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help growers to use the nitrogen not only that is in the shallow aquifer, but is also in the soil. And as part of that effort, what we'd like to see is some of that money go to paying technical services providers to talk about some of the things that you mentioned, Mr. Moore. What sort of nutrients are in the soil? What sort of practices can the growers implement that utilizes those nutrients that are in the soil, such as taking a look at crop rotation, such as taking a look at the nutrient availability in the soil, so that they can, if possible, ramp down the nutrients that they're using in their irrigation water.
Yes, so I think you've done an effective job for my part, in articulating that there's a long-term target that the regional board has grappled with and has used the TMDL process to try to articulate. And then in the short term is really where the focus is on management, using the implementation tools. You didn't mean, and the regional board didn't mean to divert from the importance of these short-term actions, but to use the TMDL process to really set the long-term goal.
Exactly. A TMDL, particularly these TMDLs, these two TMDLs, are really long-term implementation strategies. As Mr. Lawfer pointed out, and as Mr. Osmolowski pointed out, they're not the regulation in and of themselves, but they are long-term strategies to reach our water quality standards.
I just have a follow-up on that. So the grant that you're talking about, I just thought I'd mention that CDFA has a training program for crop advisors, for certified crop advisors, focusing on application of nitrogen and some of the ag orders. And in the last training session that they had, I asked them to put together or to do a survey to get some information about where these crop advisors exist, because it seems that the majority of them are in the San Joaquin Valley and not on Central Coast. And in fact, the survey results prove that out. I think it was about 17% of the participants overall. They had 2 training sessions. 17% were from Central Coast. So anything you all can do, if you have some additional dollars, to try and encourage folks, PCAs, to also get certified as crop advisors, because those are folks that are interacting directly with the growers, and maybe you wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, with additional programs, but just get more folks out in the field to interact directly with farmers.
Indeed, thank you for your comment. Sort of the old adage, build it and they will come. When you put $3 million into irrigation nutrient management, that sort of build it and they will come approach, and I really think that we're going to get the certified crop advisors like you're talking about as a result of that. And frankly, I think what we need to do is we need to continue to build up our rapport with the growers, and how shall I say, engage in effective communication, so that they know that they can basically trust when we say that if you demonstrate progress, that you are demonstrating compliance with these various orders. And part of that is providing the funds and the type of services that you refer to that help them do that.
No, thank you. The questions and discussion have been excellent. I'll just take a few seconds here and congratulate and thank Mr. Merkley for the conciseness of his remarks today.
I move adoption of this TMDL.
I will second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? I should be able to hear 4 ayes and not have to ask that question. Thank you. That was a very good conversation, I think, and I appreciate all those responses as well as what you've built into it. I thought the explanation was quite good, and we all have a long way to go together, and the together part is what I'll emphasize collectively. With that, let's move on to item number 6.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I am the TMDL Program Manager in the Central Coast region, and now we are moving on to item number 6.
And you're still Chris Rose.
And I'm still Chris Rose, yes. And to my left is Mr. Larry Harlan, who is staff person who developed the next agenda item, which is the TMDL for the Santa Maria River watershed. And I will assume that the board would like to hear a brief presentation on this TMDL, so we will proceed. And I'll hand over the microphone to Mr. Larry Harlan.
Great. Thank you, Chris. I'd like to mention that this TMDL is basically I was very fortunate as a staff person to have the Salinas TMDL a couple of months ahead. And as I developed this, I utilized as much as we could from the public feedback, the comments that were received for Salinas were integrated into this project for the Lower Santa Maria River nutrient TMDL directly. So it's almost I don't want to say carbon copy because the numbers are somewhat different, but it is very similar to the Salinas project. So I'll go ahead and move through the presentation here.
Thank you.
Is the right one? Okay, thank you. Great. The Santa Maria project was approved by our Central Coast Water Board in May. It too utilizes existing regulatory measures to implement the TMDL, which is our irrigated agricultural order for the Central Coast. It also is consistent with our highest priorities of the Central Coast Water Board. As I mentioned earlier, the same approach were used as in the Salinas project, which you just heard. It has been reviewed by US EPA, and we have received comment that it fully meets all of the requirements under the Clean Water Act. There are multiple beneficial use impairments to 11 water bodies. The TMDL, approved TMDL, will address a total of 36 water body constituent impairments. It's a fairly significant impacts in the lower Salinas Santa Maria River watershed. It will protect beneficial uses such as municipal domestic supply, agricultural supply, aquatic life, multiple aquatic life beneficial uses, as well as groundwater recharge. Establishes numeric targets for nitrate and ionized ammonia, the nitrogen compounds. It proposes wet and dry season numbers for both of these compounds, nitrate and orthophosphate. It'll also establish targets for the response indicators such as dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll A, microcystins, dissolved oxygen, and which are helpful for protection of aquatic beneficial life uses. We received 2 comments letters for the hearing. One from Richard Sweet, City of Santa Maria, and a comment letter from Kay Mercer. In conclusion, I'd like to recommend adoption of this basin plan amendment, and that concludes my presentation.
Or could you go back one slide? The targets for nutrient response indicators. I was tracking, the nutrient numeric endpoint project pretty closely a couple of years ago, and these look familiar. Could you comment on these nutrient response indicators, and are they they come from this nutrient numeric endpoint process?
Yes. The nutrient numeric endpoint is a process for developing targets, and the endpoints are, in fact, dissolved oxygen, concentration and saturation, as well as some chlorophyll A. So with respect to how that NNU works is developing the amount of nutrients that can go into a system and prevent excursions or exceedance of the water quality objectives pertaining to dissolved oxygen, and criteria for chlorophyll A for biostimulatory and algal production. So,
Yeah, and
so they're tied in directly.
Yeah, that's right. I just point out to my fellow board members that this is a process that it's linking the state board efforts for the statewide effort with the regional board efforts, and having a science-based approach to setting numeric targets. So I'm pleased to see it all coming together after these few years of effort. Thanks.
But did that process have the microcystins in it? I don't think so.
The microcystins are not directly a component of the NNE. It doesn't establish an endpoint for microcystins. We know there is evidence that algal biomass, excessive algal biomass, strongly correlated to the existence or presence of microcystins in most of the water bodies. This occurs primarily, from what I've observed, in the lower Santa Maria River estuary, just prior to at the river mouth where it enters the Pacific Ocean. There has been evidence of microcystin there, although it was not quantified enough there to actually quantify the amount, just the presence or absence. It was present.
Other questions? All right, let's hear from the speakers. Ms. Delahunt, and we have one other card. Do you want to have the last word because you've already talked and let someone go first, or do you want to go first?
Can I go first?
You can, because your card was here first.
I just want to make a clarification on the CEQA document that I was referring to. It was for this Santa Maria TMDL for chlorpyrifos. And that's where I was referring to the comments you guys made on the small broccoli growers, that they probably won't be able to use that product, and they won't be able to grow anything else either.
But is that in the 30-year time frame or tomorrow?
I don't know. When I read this document, I saw as soon as the TMDL is adopted, you have to implement it immediately, within 1 year, within 3 years. I saw those numbers. I did see the 30-year progress towards, but I also saw immediately, 1 year, and 3 years. So clarification on what exactly do you mean would be helpful. And just to tell you, in the Oso Flaco area, I know that it's bad. I'm not going to mince words, it's bad. But growers in that area have started to implement all kinds of best management practices to clean it up, at least the surface water part of it. And then again, here comes the pump and fertilize with the shallow aquifers. So it's just a big concern. I'm going to tell you, it's a big concern.
Clarification?
Yes, thank you. This is Chris Rose, TMDL Program Manager in Region 3, and the Central Coast Water Board approved the TMDL for the Santa Maria River watershed for toxicity and pesticides last Thursday, the 30th of January. And in that TMDL, that is where we have allocations for chlorpyrifos. So Ms. Delahunt's concerns about the CEQA related to chlorpyrifos are for that TMDL, not this TMDL before you today.
Okay. All right. So that one will come to us down the road.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, that is also a basin plan amendment approval, so that will come your way in probably about 8 months or so.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that clarification. Let's move on to Steve Kahn, Utilities Engineer for the City of Santa Maria. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you, Chairman Marcus and board members. Again, my name is Steve Kahn, and I'm the Utilities Engineer with the City of Santa Maria, and I'm speaking here today on behalf of the city. And first of all, I'd just like to thank you for your engaging conversations I've heard so far on these two items. I'm glad that you're engaged and listening. It's really refreshing. The city would like to thank the regional board staff for working with them on this TMDL. The city's been working closely with the regional board on developing an innovative approach to addressing the city's water quality requirements. The city will be meeting later this month with the board to discuss the development of an integrated plan to achieve the city's water quality requirements based on EPA's integrated plan framework and watershed approach to the taken in the LA region. So we're working on a plan that really addresses all of the impacts and mitigations for our water quality issues, whether it be stormwater, TMDLs, and really trying to solve them all and not make them conflict with each other. And it's going well, so we're looking forward to that. The city sees great promise in this approach. So I have two comments on this TMDL today. First of all, there's 3 channels that go through the Santa Maria Valley. They're the Blosser Channel, the Bradley Channel, and the Main Street Ditch. And these are really man-made water bodies that carry agricultural water and flood control waters. They're not natural water bodies. Well, they're listed in the basin plan. And so we would like to see them not listed in the basin plan. They have never been water bodies, and the city reiterates its long-standing request that the board determine that the current treatment of these channels is based on faulty data. So the board should find that the channels are not water body subject to the TMDL, because we're using these channels to carry water through the city of Santa Maria into downstream treatment facilities like bioretention facilities and percolation ponds. So if we keep them as water bodies, we can't technically use them to transmit the water down to these treatment facilities. If we can't get it removed from the TMDL, these 3 water bodies, at a minimum, the city would like to confirm from staff that they will continue to work with the city on how and where compliance with the TMDL will be achieved. This confirmation is important as the city moves forward with the integrated plan, which will seek to address nutrients on a watershed basis that uses retention and infiltration methods to improve water quality. So we'd like to see those 3 water bodies removed from the TMDL. The second point is really rooted in the conversation that we just had earlier about the concentration-based approach and the pump and fertilize discussion we've had. And the concerns we have, if you go with the pump and fertilize, you're going to have a higher nutrient level, so therefore you're not going to be in compliance with a concentration-based approach. We would suggest we'd switch to a load-based approach. So sometimes you'd have higher amounts, sometimes you'd have lower amounts, but overall you'd have a load-based concentration, and you wouldn't be in violation of the concentration-based approach. So the farmers, if they're pumping and they're concerned about being in violation, they'll go to the deeper aquifer in the Santa Maria Valley, because the deeper aquifer does not have as much nutrient loading in it versus the shallow aquifer, which does have a higher nutrient level. So once again, we request that you would really consider that and direct staff to express the allocation and load rather than concentration based. So those are really all my comments for today, and I appreciate your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you. The issue of taking a water body out is something we've gone through in other arenas. It's a very defined process we have to go through, and if somebody can do it more concisely than I would, we can't just do it in this context. There's a whole separate process under EPA rules and others that we would have to go through. So I just want to turn to staff for comment on that. Again,
Yeah.
for people who are listening.
Yes, thank you, Chair Marcus. Yes, the board has discussed this. If you may recall, I'm not sure who of you were here in September. We had another TMDL before the board for the San Maria River watershed, the fecal indicator bacteria TMDL, where Mr. Khan, actually one of Mr. Khan's representatives was here when we were talking about these channels and the removal of the beneficial uses in these channels. It is my board's wish and my executive management's wish that these channels be protected for beneficial uses. When we brought the TMDL before the state board back in September, your board, this board also approved that TMDL and maintained that those beneficial uses be protected and that the TMDLs and allocations that protect those beneficial uses should stay in the TMDL. So that is still our wish and our contention, and you're right, to remove a beneficial use that is designated in the basin plan specifically requires a use attainability analysis, which is separate from this process that we are talking about today. If you want me to elaborate on Mr. Khan's wishes, if we can't get them removed, could we be creative in our implementation? And the answer is yes, absolutely. One of the things that this TMDL and all of our TMDLs for the Phase 2 permit which will be implementing these TMDLs says, is that we would like the city to develop a waste load allocation attainment plan, which is essentially a plan for how they're going to go about meeting the allocations for the various TMDLs that they're responsible for. Mr. Khan mentioned the integrated approach, which we applaud. It's really, we think it's a great idea. And essentially what it is taking a look at all their requirements through their MS4 permit and through the TMDLs that are going to be adopted in the Santa Maria watershed and coalescing those requirements into a master implementation plan. And as Mr. Khan mentioned, we're going to be getting together with the city on Valentine's Day, February 14th, and we're going to be discussing the details of that plan. So can you be creative in how these TMDLs and allocations are achieved in these water bodies that Mr. Khan makes reference to? The answer is yes.
I'd like to remind the board that they will be seeing that approach because this is a small MS4, and it will be coming to you as an amendment so that you'll see how they've implemented that.
But is there, as Mr. Khan says, there is the risk of working at cross purposes if you're doing the nitrogen pumping from shallow groundwater aquifers. You will have higher concentrations of nitrate in the runoff from the fields, I assume.
Okay.
And so
Yes.
there he is downstream. And so what's he supposed to do?
Yes. So the city of Santa Maria is in a position, or they're in a situation geographically where they're receiving agricultural return waters from upstream, and they're flowing through these channels, and we understand that sort of conundrum that they're in. One of the approaches that the integrated plan I think is going to mention, and one of the things that we've been talking about, even in reference to that Proposition 84 money for the $1.25 million, is for them to potentially use these channels as a footprint for best management practices to basically treat that water. And we think that is something that we would like to take a look at, and something that I think that from a personal standpoint, I think that we have some latitude to allow them to do. Yeah.
Well, his specific point in terms of how you would express the limit in load versus concentration, can you address that? Because I'm happy to hear that you'll talk further. This is just a puzzle conundrum opportunity, however you want to put it, that people can figure out together.
Sure. Part of the implementation plan, as which is like the agricultural order in our language in the TMDL, is that they can demonstrate progress with the TMDL by demonstrating progress towards achieving those targets. All right. So one of the things that we are very clear about in in both of these TMDLs is that progress can be demonstrated in terms of load reduction, showing load reduction. So yes, the allocations are in terms of concentration, and let's face it, the beneficial use that we're protecting is municipal drinking water supply, and that water quality objective is in terms of concentration. So it's completely a logical approach for us to have an allocation that is also in terms of concentration. Now that said, they can demonstrate progress with complying with this, with their MS4 permit, and in showing demonstration of compliance of this TMDL through load reduction. So if they would like to take a look at concentration with flow and show that they're reducing load, that is demonstration of progress.
And it's key that, and first of all, I appreciate Chris's points, and I agree with mostly everything he said. It's important that we take the measurements of the water past the treatment facilities so that we take benefit of those, and not in the middle or somewhere else where you're stuck with what we're talking about. It's where you take the measurements that's very important.
Yeah.
Yes, that is something that Mr. Khan also mentioned earlier in his comments, and something that I would like to see in their proposal, in their integrated plan, something that that Mr. Khan and I have talked about in our individual meetings, is that where could that compliance point be, if for lack of a better word, where could that compliance point be in those channels? And that's something that we actually discussed for that TMDL for the bacteria. And we said, hey, maybe that compliance point could be way downstream at the very end before its confluence with the Santa Maria River, after the would-be treatment processes that you're talking about. So yes, we would advocate for that and think that's a great idea. It would be downstream of that treatment.
Right, exactly.
That's good. That is true. We did discuss that in September about the importance of point of compliance. I appreciate you bringing that up. And also, just to clarify for my own mind going forward with the integrated plan, you are talking about engineered wetlands, et cetera, natural treatment systems within those channels that are in the basin plan. Is that right?
The actual facility we're working on right now is after them.
Okay.
They would drain into the treatment
Sure.
facility.
Right, so they would be a conveyance component.
Correct. It'd be the conveyance component,
Good.
exactly.
Yeah, and the lines do get blurry. I mean, we can point to places in the state, Santa Ana region, Newport Bay, TMDL efforts there, where TMDL implementation does involve modification of water bodies that are in the basin plan to incorporate what's known as natural treatment systems, which is basically just taking wetland and stream functions and restoring them in these conveyance channels. So I think we have a long history of encouraging that type of creativity, and just want you to take every opportunity to restore these natural functions where you can.
Perfect.
Yes, in this particular situation, we're talking about a wood chip bioreactor. So.
Yes.
Interesting.
Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to working with staff on this. Thank you very
Great,
much.
thank you for your time. Do I have a motion or any further questions?
So moved.
So second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And thank you. This was fabulous presentation.
Right.
Yes,
By all.
excellent.
you.
That was good, very good discussion. Really appreciate
And
it.
the integrated plan in Santa Maria. That's exciting to hear about. Thank you.
All right. That concludes our agenda for today. Thank you all for your time and attention, and we'll see you all soon. This meeting is adjourned.
Charles coming on these things.